Hi, guys. Welcome to the chat. Glad to have you tonight. I see you guys conversing with each other and, um, just having a conversation before the chat. So I'm really glad to see you. Let me actually plug into Instagram here. Instagram is always my issue. And let me also say, too, thank you for waiting, guys. Um, it's been a day. Um, what happens to you? Okay. So I really appreciate you guys being just patient. I think this is a conversation that a lot of you can relate to tonight. So let me just make sure that I plug into Instagram here. I'm going to remove Instagram and we're going to reapply Instagram. So then people over at Instagram can find us and trickle over for tonight's live chat. All right, I should be able to do that in literally 5 seconds. And before I jump in to this topic, I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief overview. And also before I start welcoming you guys. So let me type into Instagram, join us over at my channel. Okay. I think we're good to go. All right, guys, let me give you just a little bit of an overview of why this topic tonight. We've been talking a lot about family dynamics that's just really unhealthy, right? And the first video, which went viral in a matter of hours, was about sibling jealousy. And also parental jealousy. So I paired the two. The topic after that was sibling favoritism. So, how a very toxic parent favors one child over the other and how that impacts you. So, it made sense to move into step parents because this is another area that is just so complicated. And there's a reason why I'm in the office today as opposed to at home in my home office. And that's because I'm going to say at least 6 families today who are step parents, stepchild families. And it's something. There's a lot of chaos that can happen in these families. And one of the reasons why is because there's often a step parent, whether you're a child or an adult child, there's a step parent that can, not all step parents, let me put that out there, but some of them, there's a step parent that steps into a family dynamic, maybe a family dynamic that is already shaky, right? Already toxic, already unhealthy. And here comes the step parent, right? And a lot of times, and research backs this up, a lot of times, step parents don't fully understand what they're getting themselves into when they enter somebody else's life. My grandfather, I'll give you his story. What he did was wrong to my mom and to my uncle. He had an affair on my grandma. And this is just an example of how this toxic dynamic can get started. Had an affair on my grandmother. They were married really young, like 17 and a half, maybe 18. Had my mom, had my uncle, and then so many years later, after let's say 12 or 15 years, he had an affair. The stepmother then attempted to get involved in my mother and my uncle's lives. And let me tell you, it was a lot of chaos. It was fireworks because the family situation between my grandfather and his wife, my grandmother, was very shaky. Alcoholism was involved, infidelity, deception, the list goes on. It was already unstable and shaky. And unfortunately, stepmom entered the scene and caused a lot more chaos and toxicity than needed to happen. So that's one example of a very toxic step family kind of connection or relationship. Now, let me give you an example of what I dealt with a year ago. I had a step family where dad lost his wife. Wife ended up dying after giving childbirth. Dad felt all alone and lonely and didn't really know how to raise this infant. And here comes another woman who happened to be their neighbor. And she kind of gave him everything that he needed, right? Everything that he didn't have in his deceased wife. So what happens? Dad decides, I'm going to go ahead and marry this woman who is my neighbor, and I'm going to bring her into the family, and she is going to be my child's parent, and we're going to be a family. After, I'm going to say 12 years, this is when they came to see me. After 12 years of struggling, the child in the middle of all of this had turned 15, 16, attempted suicide because stepmom decided to play mom in such a way that she was almost taking over the biological mother's rights. Even though the biological mom was deceased, stepmom is still a stepmom. And so this stepmom ended up pushing so many buttons in the child's life that the child attempted suicide, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 5 times, because stepmom felt she had the right to become that child's actual mother, right? And that's in quotation marks. This is just part of the dynamic that I'm talking about, okay? So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to highlight to you what happens, what research says is not healthy in this dynamic, how a very unhealthy and toxic step parent can enter the scene and create for your life a lot of trauma, fear, anxiety, depression, chaos, the list goes on. Okay, so this is the topic for tonight's live chat. Let me go to the chat box and welcome you guys. Tomorrow's live chat, we're going to talk about something I think even more interesting than this particular conversation. But let me go ahead and welcome you guys. I see the retro woman 80. Hello and welcome to the live chat. So glad to have you tonight. I also see Cam. Hello and welcome, and thank you for that. And you're welcome. Glad that this is something that you can relate to. Sad at the same time, right? Live life. Hello and welcome. Glad to see you in tonight's live chat. Welcome. All right. I see Courtney Frazier. Hello and welcome. Glad to have you. I see Tammy Nicely. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Welcome to tonight's live chat. Glad to have you. I also saw Sun and Sunflowers. Hello and welcome to the live chat. Glad to have you. T Mac. Hello. Thank God it is Friday, right? My brain noodles are gone. So I can't wait to go home. I can't wait to go home. Marie B, hello and welcome. Good evening to you as well. Glad to have you. Nancy R, glad to see you in tonight's live chat. Says, I am one and I've had one. Yeah, absolutely. Let me throw out there too, Nancy R. And this is for you and for any other step parent who's a good step parent. Not all step parents are like this, right? Not all step parents are evil, but there's some step parents where you're like, ooh, this is not a good dynamic. Like you're stepping on the toes of my biological parent, whether they're dead or alive. And that can create a lot of chaos, right? And it can also be chaotic for you too, as the step parent coming into a toxic family dynamic that you're not aware of, right? So I want to make sure that I'm fair and put that out there. Napalm 1334, hello and welcome. Glad to have you in tonight's live chat. I also see Silent Walk, hello and welcome. Glad to see you. Access to Rome, hello, and thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I hope your week was good as well. All right. Napalm 1334. I'm going to read this before we jump into the content here. Napalm 1334 says, my stepmom used to monitor my food intake for some reason. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Napalm 1334 goes on to say, I would be so hungry, I'd have to run into the bathroom and snack. That is horrible. I have a step parent, a child, kind of a situation that happened several years ago in my practice where, the parent did monitor the child's food intake. And it wasn't for the reason you would think, right? Anytime a parent of any sort has to monitor food intake, we think, okay, it's for health reasons, for diet, prevention of obesity, or to help a child who's too thin gain some weight, whatever, right? We think it's for health reasons. But for the step family that I dealt with years ago, Mom was monitoring the food because she didn't want to have to pay to buy additional food just because the child was eating too much. So that doesn't shock me at all, Napalm 1334. Let me give you some things to think about, okay? Let's say, for example, and you're going to learn some new terminology tonight as well. So let's say, for example, your father marries someone, right? And she comes into your life. She seems like the perfect stepmom, right? She loves you. At least it appears that way. She seems to be equal to you. She seems to be just out there to support you, right? There's a kindness between the two of you, and you think you can like her. But here's where research says these kind of relationships go downhill. Let's say everything seemed okay at the very beginning, but as time went on, you realized that your stepmom was competitive, excessively controlling, dominating, stepping on the toes of the biological parents. And we're going to break this down a little bit. Negatively talking about your parent, your biological parent, and showing jealousy or favoritism, right? Research suggests that all of these behaviors can lead to psychological regression on your part, no matter what age you are. It can actually lead to psychological regression. Now, research suggests also, too, that psychological regression can consist of what we call mutism. So you absolutely stop talking. You don't verbalize your thoughts and your feelings. You kind of shut down completely and emotionally. And it's not necessarily because you don't want to talk. It's I'm feeling trapped in this dynamic between my step parent and my biological parent, and I don't feel open. I don't feel like I'm going to be heard, and I don't feel like I'm going to be respected. So your brain automatically in fight or flight mode shuts completely down. And so we call that mutism. And we can also call it selective mutism as well. You just completely lose the ability to talk verbally. You just say, I can't, and your brain follows suit, and then you don't talk. So mutism is one psychological regression. Research also shows what we call fetal positioning. So you may find yourself really hurting behind the dynamic within your family. And so some people, and I've seen this in my office, some people they get on the floor and they cradle themselves in a sense. It's almost like self-hugging. So this is called a psychological regression, a regression behavior. And it's also called a regression defense mechanism. But it's almost like you hug yourself or you cradle yourself, and it's almost like you're saying, I need to be cradled, right? My emotions are making me vulnerable and raw. Another regressive behavior is emotional outbursts. So just flying off the whim, right? Or flying off what do they say? The handle. Really having a hard time navigating your emotional responses. And also, what can be seen as a psychological regression is returning to behaviors that you engaged in when you were younger, right? Just somewhere in the back of your mind, you are no longer that mature individual. You have now regressed to a place of childhood or emotional vulnerability or sensitivity. I can label it that. So research suggests that psychological regression can happen if you are the stepchild in a family where there's a step parent. There's also the I'll say expression of what we call internalizing and externalizing behaviors. So you may start to internalize all of your emotions, and you may become depressed, suicidal, anxious, angry, resentful, all of those different things. So we call those internalizing emotions or behaviors, or externalizing behaviors. You just start arguing and becoming oppositional. You may not want to have anything to do with the stepmother. So you may actually walk away from that family dynamic. You may go no contact, right? That's your externalizing behavior. I'm not going to talk to you. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like I'm loved or cared for. So, what am I going to do? I'm going to externalize my pain, and I'm going to block your phone number, refuse to talk to you, and go no contact at some point. There's also what can happen between you and the biological parent is impaired parent-child connectedness, right? You and that biological parent just kind of start to break apart because that step parent has created so much chaos in your life that it's making it hard for you to connect with your biological parent, right? You may find yourself wanting to walk away even from the biological parent because you can't stand the step parent. So, what happens there? It's something known as step family cohesion, and that ends up becoming broken apart, right? You don't want to be connected to the biological parent, and you don't want to be connected to the biological. Did I say the biological parent already? The step parent. You don't want to be connected to the biological parent or the step parent, and that can cause a family that is not cohesive or together. I'll put it that way. Can you imagine? And I'm sure some of you have dealt with this. Can you imagine having a step sibling, right? You have a step parent, biological parent who is trying to connect with you, but then you also have a step sibling, and the step sibling can be the devil, right? Years ago, I had that dynamic where the step parent brought a child into the equation, and these were adult children, by the way, 31-year-old and a 30-year-old. The biological parent had a child, but the step parent brought their child into the same home, and there was nothing but chaos. They all lived in the same home. The 30-year-old and the 31-year-old. The 30-year-old is the stepchild and or the step sibling, and it just created chaos because the step sibling somehow takes on the mindset sometimes of the step parent. And in a situation where the step parent is the problem, the step sibling wanting to stand up for the step parent, right, causes problems for you. I hope that made sense. The step parent's child can then cause issues for you as the biological child of your biological parent. And that's an ugly thing, right? Nobody's getting along there with the biological child, and maybe that's you. So, those are some ideas. Those are some new terms I want you guys to kind of keep in mind as we go along tonight. I'm hoping to wrap up by 7:30 ish. Or maybe a little bit sooner, but keep that in mind, guys. We have psychological regression that can happen. There's also externalizing and internalizing behaviors that can happen to you, right? There's an impaired parent child connectedness. So you may want nothing to do with the biological parent anymore because of the step parent or the step sibling that's involved. And then there's no family cohesion. Nobody's getting along, right? So there's disequilibrium, right? Everything is imbalanced and unstable. There's no peace. So those are some concepts to keep in mind. Let me go to the chat box and see what you guys are saying. And then I'm going to highlight what typically seems to rock the boat here in these kind of dynamics. You are dealing with a step parent who is evil and cruel and just doesn't seem to understand you. And maybe you're dealing with a step parent who seemed nice at first and they changed over time. Or maybe the step parent has unresolved behavioral and emotional and psychological problems. I don't know. Whatever the case, you need to know what is it that rocks the boat and what does psychology say it is. So we're going to get to that. All right. So let me go back to the chat box. And see what you guys are saying. Napalm1334 says, thanks, Tam. You're welcome. Absolutely. Cherries Jubilee. Welcome to the live chat. Glad to see you in tonight's discussion. Erica Gardens, hello, and welcome to the live chat. I remember you from the last chat. Glad to see you. Yeah, Nancy R says, this not being heard made me feel like I just didn't fit in. I'm guessing what you mean by that, Nancy R, is the step family, the dynamic that you stepped into. I'm not sure. But I can say that there are a lot of people who don't feel heard when a step parent enters the scene. It's wonderful when you can have a step parent who is loving, engaging, compassionate, willing to work with you and understanding the boundary. But there are a lot of situations where, a step parent gets involved and they kind of overshoot. You know what I mean by that? They don't seem to understand that there's damage being done by you trying to be the biological parent. And maybe it's not a logical thing, or maybe it's not a conscious thing, I can also say. But sometimes step parents do, they overshoot, they get overly involved, and that can cause true damage. Let me just say here before I pull up Courtney Frazier's comment, that anytime I'm working with a step parent situation, the biological child, ends up talking to me about how very minimized they feel in the family now, because this new person has stepped in and they've also brought their family in, and it's caused a situation where the biological child, adult child, no longer wants to be involved, right? It's like the step parent has brought their family into the biological family in such a way that it pushes out the biological child, right? It's almost like that step parent and their child takes the place of the real family. And that can be very destabilizing and traumatizing. Courtney Fraser says, I don't have a step parent. However, you are describing me completely. That's interesting. You may go through some of this with biological parents, so don't feel bad if you see yourself in this. Oh my goodness. Facts don't care about your feelings. Welcome to the live chat. Glad to have you. Says, my stepmother used to make sure I knew that I wasn't in. She would co-sign my stepfather's poor behavior, even the vicious behavior towards me. I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised. Sometimes if the step parent is toxic and unhealthy and just not a very good step parent, sometimes they do take the role of supporting the biological parent, and the biological parent is wrong. But sometimes they do that to hold their relationship together with that individual, if that makes sense, right? So let's say in your situation, your stepmother may have supported your dad because she wants to have a very close, trusting relationship with your dad. And if that means coming against you, she'll do it. I'm not saying that's what she did, but that's typically the dynamic. Silent Walk says some adults just don't grow up. That is true. I agree. I agree. The Retro Woman 80 says, my late dad's wife, also dead, was jealous of my brother and I, his bio kids. Yes. And that's a dynamic as well. Sometimes the bio kids are so loved that when the parent moves on to another relationship, that can cause some ugliness, right? The step family, step children, stepmother just doesn't like the fact that the bio kids have a certain place in the family, and that can cause some trouble. Consider the situation. I had this situation today in the office here. Consider this: a biological mother, for example, may put you, a biological child, on her will, right? On her will. And maybe she's going to leave you the house and the car and the $20,000 that she saved in her savings account. And you're the biological child. What do you think that stepchild is going to think? What do you think that step parent is going to think? There's going to be some tension there. And that's usually the dynamic. And that's the dynamic that I had in today's session with the family that I saw. It's the biological parent is giving the biological children a lot of access to wealth when they die, but the step family is not going to get anything. And that can lead to a lot of fireworks. That can also lead to unresolved jealousy and favoritism. And that's something else that can make life really difficult. Lonica, hello and welcome. Glad to see you. Says I am new here. I thought so. I saw as I'm scrolling through, I saw your screen name. I'm like, I don't remember that one. So glad to have you in tonight's live chat. I hope it will be helpful. Um, Lonica says, been watching for a while. Very awesome videos. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to hear that. Tonight's live chat is very specific, so not a lot of people can relate to this topic, but I'm glad to have you guys aboard anyway. Sun and Sunflower says, I was a step parent. My ex was very toxic and causing confusion. Found out later he was talking about me to family members and his children and speaking to me really horrible about his children. Yep, that's another dynamic. That's another dynamic. Can you imagine what kind of chaos that can cause if you have a toxic ex from way back then that's coming into your now situation? I see that every day all the time. Napalm 1334 says my stepmom was cold at my dad's funeral. Totally chilling effect. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes step parents can be very cold at the funeral. That's an issue that I also had recently, not today, but I also had that recently where the stepchildren went to the funeral of the stepmom and they just kind of sat there emotionless, and the biological child of the deceased brought the tape in for me to see, and I'm just looking at this funeral thinking this is ice cold. Like this is not a healthy dynamic whatsoever. The reality is that you're not blood, right? So there's a little bit of separation because of that sometimes, believe it or not. And on top of maybe not being connected by blood, there's also too this underlying resentment that happens sometimes between biological and step families, and that shows up at funerals, right? It's something I see way too often. I don't like it. Cheryl, welcome to the live chat. I have not seen you on a chat in so long. I'm so glad to see you. Welcome. Says you always have the best topics. Thank you so much for that. And you're welcome. You're welcome. This is a very, very, very narrow topic. So I'm surprised as many of you as I see on that you're actually on tonight. I'm surprised. Cam says, the problem that we have encountered is my husband's stepmom is the speaker for his dad. She speaks for his dad since he won't speak up about concerns. She is not mindful in her delivery either. Yeah, absolutely. Let me make sure I have the players correctly. So the problem that we have encountered is my husband's stepmom. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep, that can cause chaos, right? That's just like we would call that cross generational trauma or cross generational chaos, right? The communication is off because stepmom is trying to speak for the biological child's parent. Ooh, that's chaotic, right? I'm confused just processing it. Queen Pen 888, hello and welcome to the live chat. Glad to see you. This will be the last comment before we get back into the content. Queen Pen 888 says, my situation was a stepfather causes issues between me and my mom. Yep, that's another one. I'm the firstborn daughter. My mother and him had a child together, my half sister. Yep. Sometimes the step parent can get in, or stepfather can get in and cause chaos between the biological child and parent. Absolutely. I think I talked about that at the very beginning. Queen Pen 888 says, my father was never in my life. My half sister's father was. My mother treats us differently and treats me unfairly. The stepfather causes a lot of issues between me and my mother. I'm the black sheep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. When a step parent and the biological parent bring a child into the world, the dynamics in and of themselves shift. Because the reality is, and I hate to say this, the reality is sometimes the family feels more cohesive when the step parent and the biological parent have a child of their own. And so sometimes it's like they are a group and you're out here over here just hanging out. And sometimes that's not intentional, right, Queen Pen 888? But it feels like it. It feels like it. Okay, so there's a lot more of you commenting. I'm going to come back to the chat box right now. I want to get back into the content, okay, guys, so we can kind of stay on schedule here. Let me highlight some things the psychology has found that rocks the boat, okay? Think about being reprimanded, put into your place, talked to negatively because you got into an argument with your biological parent. Psychology has always known that it is shaky ground when it comes to step parents, that sometimes the well-being of children and adult children is based on how well that step parent is. And if that step parent comes into the scene, comes upon the scene, comes into the situation, comes into the family dynamic and tries to parent before there's an established relationship, then that's a problem. And what I mean by this is this, and psychology backs this 100%. And I'm going to put some, excuse me, I'm going to put some links to articles and research in the description box for you so that you will have them. But a step parent can either try to parent you by putting you in your place, setting a boundary, setting a rule in a household, setting a rule for if you call, if you text, if you visit. That is unhealthy based on the fact that they don't really have an established relationship with you in the first place, right? So being told what to do by this step parent, father, stepfather, stepmother, and there's no pre-established relationship, like the relationship is either non-existent or very poor, that can cause a lot of destabilization within the family or disequilibrium. It can also cause, according to psychology, a lot of psychological and emotional issues on your part. In a little bit here, I'm going to highlight what can happen to you in these kind of dynamics. But for right now, what can happen to you is just feeling very ousted and minimized. You can also feel like there's condescending communication with the step parent. You can also feel like you're being pushed out of your family, or that the biological parent has abandoned you. So a fear of abandonment develops over time because that step parent is setting rules and boundaries or disciplining or calls themselves correcting you. And it's a dynamic that's unhealthy because there's no pre-established relationship. So psychology says there has to be some kind of pre-established bond before that step parent can jump in and dictate things. The other issue is that a step parent may try to replace a biological parent. That is a no-no as well. Coming into the situation and trying to play the role as if they are a biological parent is not okay. That can also lead to chaos. And psychology says that it's not only something that can lead to chaos, but it can also lead to complex PTSD, depending on how far that step parent is getting into things, right? So if there's, let's say you were an adolescent, if there's physical abuse by the step parent, if there's emotional incest, if you will, so that step parent is putting you into an emotional role that they should not be putting you into, right? Maybe you've become the surrogate parent to their child, or maybe you've become the surrogate spouse while the actual spouse is away or at work. That emotional incest, that can also create an issue within the family dynamic, right? So we call it replacement behaviors or replacement roles. Trying to become an actual parent or a biological parent is a no-no. That can create issues. And there's this whole concept too, guys, of playing house, and that's in quotation marks, playing house, right? A step parent getting into a situation where they feel so involved that it almost goes to their head, right? They almost become a narcissistic parent. They don't care what you have to say. They don't care about how you feel. They don't care about the damage they're causing. And they also don't care about your opinion on anything. They just want to get behind the wheel and become that step parent, right? Or they may try to win your love and affection. That's another thing that's not okay. So this whole idea of playing house, right? I want to get behind the wheel and I want to be this parent, or I want to be this new spouse, or I want to have that control. That can be very, very traumatizing. And if you're experiencing emotional incest or psychological abuse or some kind of cruelty at the hands of the step parent, we're talking about complex PTSD possibly developing over time. Let me also mention too, before I go back to the chat box and take a break, that favoritism and jealousy is also something research suggests and psychology has found to be very, what's the word, traumatizing in a step family situation. So if there's a biological child in the mix and the biological child is being favored and is being loved and is being told that they are wonderful and they're being given all the opportunities that you didn't get, that can also create some trauma down the line. Jealousy, right? Maybe that stepchild is jealous of you and your biological parent, and that can cause issues as well. So psychology definitely highlights that as an issue. Parent-child conflict is also the last thing I'm going to mention before I go to the chat box. Parent-child conflict, parent biological child conflict. If a step parent tries to get into that and become the negotiator, become the mediator, or become the parent who kind of mediates the situation, that's also a very tricky place, and that should not be happening, right? The step parent should know their place and stay in that place, not step out of it and try to drive or navigate the biological relationship. That's not okay either. That's not okay either. So psychology highlights that as a risk factor to complex PTSD. Okay, let me take a break here, guys. Let me go to the chat box, see what you guys are saying. I'm going to highlight a couple of things that can happen to you, and then we're going to wrap up. Tomorrow's chat will be somewhat similar, so stay tuned. I'm going to post in the community section some information so that you'll know what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Okay, Cherry's Jubilee says, Dad hates kids. Your stepdad? Is that your stepdad, Cherry's Jubilee? I don't know. You let me know. You tell me. You tell me. There are some step parents too that do not like children, period. But they sometimes get into a relationship where there's children. And what happens in those scenarios, and this is what I've seen in practice, is the step parent does everything they can to get rid of the child so that they can just have the relationship. They don't want to be a parent. They don't like the kid. So they try to do things to get you as the biological parent out of the situation. They don't want to be bothered. Facts. Wait a minute. I'm so sorry, Lonica. Did I skip you? I'm so sorry. It's been a long day. Lonica says, this one is very relatable. Going through this currently. I cut my stepmother off and she keeps trying to make herself relevant. Yeah. That's another dynamic. That's another dynamic. Sometimes the step parents feel like they need to make themselves relevant. That's not okay. It's okay to want to be respected. It's okay to want to be loved. It's okay to say, I'm the adult here. I want to be respected as the adult. But it's another thing if you're kind of begging to be paid attention to, if you will, or begging for a position as the step parent. That's a no-no. It's going to end up being very unhealthy of a dynamic. Facts don't care about your feelings says, my stepmom didn't even tell me when my stepsister passed away until a week after her passing. I found out on social media. Yeah, that's a complicated dynamic. I'm sorry that happened. There's a reason for that, though, right? There's probably some toxicity involved, and your stepmom probably didn't feel that it was necessary to even tell you. But that is toxic, to say the least. Yeah, whether or not there was a reason for it. Sun and Sunflower says, my ex is definitely cluster B that kept drama going, with me and his children. It hurts me this day. I never had children of my own after this experience. Glad I am child free. Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Children do add an added layer of complexity, right? Believe it or not, we psychotherapists, when we are billing insurance companies after dealing with families that are integrated or blended or step parent families, we have to sometimes bill what's called a complexity code. And that means that the dynamic is so complex that we actually have to bill insurance a certain way to legally and ethically highlight that the session was a complex one. Just the dynamic within the session in and of itself is a complex dynamic. And so, whether that's trauma, complex PTSD, the step parents don't get along, the step parents are in the session with the biological parents, whatever the case may be, we sometimes have to bill what's called a complexity code. So, if there are children involved or added layers of complexity, sun and sunflowers, we actually have to bill it that way too, to insurance companies. That's how complex these dynamics can become. Queen Common Sense, hello and welcome to the live check. Glad to see you tonight. Says blessings. I'm so pleased I caught you live again. That's awesome. So glad to have you. Yeah, glad to have you. All things fixed. I love that. It reminds me of the oh God, what's that channel? NPR radio, National Public Radio. They have an All Things Considered show that comes on. I love that show. All Things Fixed. Welcome to the chat. Glad to have you tonight. Says, my dad and stepmom are therapists who, I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know. I've counseled some families like that. That's rough. My dad is a counselor that has been caught cheating on my mom and cheated with a patient. Okay, that's not okay. And marries a woman who put an injunction on me to cut me out of the will. That whole thing sounds toxic, okay? All things fixed, that's a whole other live chat, okay? We're talking about ethics here. We're talking about the law. We're talking about step-parent dynamics. I'm sorry, my God. Yeah, I don't even know if I have a comment to that one without going way off topic here, but that's a very difficult dynamic. Let me just say, I'm sure that took a toll on you. Silent Walk says it takes strong family dynamics for relationships like this to work. Excellent point, Silent Walk. I agree. If you have a step parent who's healthy, and you have a biological parent who is healthy, or you have a biological and a step parent who are trying to do the right thing, it can be a wonderful relationship, right? But if it's toxicity at the core of everything, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. Another dynamic, let me just throw this in here. Another dynamic that I continue to see in my practice, and even when I've worked in other capacities as a therapist in the past, let me just say there's a dynamic where there's a biological mom, there's a biological father. They divorce. Dad goes on and has a new person that he's interested in, right? A new woman. Dad, who's desiring that normal family again, in quotation marks, pulls the biological children into the relationship with his new wife or his new girlfriend, right? And everything blows up. Why? Because the dynamic is that the girlfriend or the new wife, whatever, is becoming too involved too soon. And so the whole situation blows up. And sometimes situations like that allows the biological ex to get involved and create even more chaos, right? Because things are moving too fast, or things have not been correctly discussed, or there's no proper boundary, right? And let's say you're an adult child, maybe you're an adult child with complex PTSD and your dad's with this new woman, and now he's trying to pull you into his new relationship. Well, you may not be ready for that, right? And if you have PTSD or complex PTSD or depression, anxiety, or other issues, that's just going to compound the issue. So let me throw this out here as well, that research on step families in psychology and even social work highlights that dynamic can cause years and years upon years of more mental and emotional health problems for you. So those step individuals, those step family members can cause an even worsening situation for you down the line in terms of mental health. Peach Heart, hello and welcome to the live check. Glad to have you. Says, my stepmom lied to me and told my dad. That was 28 years ago. She has been mad at me ever since. Yep. You might get a step parent who lies, or a step parent who curtails the truth, or a step parent who doesn't understand their boundary. And when they cross that boundary, right, they're losing with you. They're losing. Elizabeth Pepper, hello and welcome to tonight's live chat. Glad to have you back. All right, just skimming for comments, and then we're going to go back to the last part of this chat. All Things Fixes, thank you so much. You're welcome. I don't know if you're saying thank you to me or what, but I'm going to say you're welcome. You're welcome. Queen Common Sense says, I was a step parent and I refused to get ensnared in the trap of co-parenting children that are not my bio children. Excellent comment of the whole entire chat. Thank you for that. Let me just say, in terms of psychology research, in terms of sociology research or social work, and in terms of my own clinical experiences, I often tell step parents, stay out of it. Don't try to become the hero by trying to be this parent who kind of partners with the new spouse. Don't do that, because that is unhealthy. You want a relationship with the spouse, with the individual, fit fine, but don't get involved in the co-parenting. I think that's a very rocky road to go down, and it's only going to blow up in your face. Don't try to put down rules. Don't try to physically discipline. Don't try to play the biological parent. Don't try to get involved as the biological parent. Stay in your lane and everything will work out. I'm glad you said that. Thank you for that. Okay, so let me tell you what's going to happen to you guys. This is what psychology says. This has been my experience as well. We talked about it at the very beginning. If you have a very toxic step parent who's unhealthy and they're creating chaos in your life and in your relationship with your biological parent, there's going to be a regression. Regression is actually a defense mechanism. When you regress, you don't have to deal with things. When you regress, you can put up a barrier and say, I'm not going to deal with it. Regression can be not talking, right? Remember, we said mutism at the very beginning. You can totally cut off all communication. We would call that stonewalling as well. You decide not to talk, right? That's a regression. You can also have emotional outbursts that are major outbursts that really puts the relationship on shaky ground, right? That's an issue. That's also an issue of regression, those outbursts. And or you can just completely blow up on your step parent and then vow never to talk to them again, right? So those I'm going to say split second decisions, I'm going to just tell you off, is not going to be helpful, right? But sometimes this is what psychology says can happen, and it's a regression. It's like you're regressing, and it's a defense mechanism. The other thing is you kind of develop a lot of emotional needs over time. You have a very unhealthy step parent. They're causing chaos in your life. They're causing chaos in your relationship with your biological parent. You're going to have a lot of unmet needs. That could be emotional, psychological, and even physical, right? It could be physical. I had a kid once say to me, my dad doesn't hug me anymore. And he doesn't hug me anymore because my stepmom put it into his head that we are not to be close. We are not to be loving, that he's showing me favor and not her children. So my dad doesn't hug me anymore. So sometimes you can lose that physical relationship with your parent as well. Research suggests that child welfare over time becomes jeopardized, right? So all of your ability to be a healthy, well-adjusted adult kind of goes down the drain. You have a step parent who's controlling every ounce of your life, maybe even controlling your biological parent, right? How they parent, how they talk to you, how they see you, relate to you. If you deal with that over an extended period of time, then you can have symptoms of complex PTSD, nightmares, flashbacks, feeling like you're in fight or flight mode all the time, panic attacks, increased anxiety, fear of abandonment. You can also really lose the ability to be confident in your own identity, right? That's part of complex PTSD. You lose a piece of who you are over time. All of these things, psychology says, can happen if you have a very unhealthy step parent, right? You can also develop anger over time that becomes unresolved. And it's unresolved anger that can push you to go no contact, not just with the step parent, but with the biological parent. And that kind of boomerangs because you lose two adults that you need, right? You should be able to rely on a step parent, but if they're toxic and unhealthy, that's not going to happen. You can also develop over time an inability to communicate in your adult relationship. So you kind of regress in your ability to maintain and develop adult relationships. So there's an impaired adult relationship that can happen in your world over time. So you have I'll put it this way, an impaired ability to develop healthy adult relationships. I'll put it that way. There can also be lifelong estrangement. I don't want anything to do with my biological parent or my step parent, right? They've caused too much trauma for me. So lifelong estrangement can also come into your life over time. And fear of abandonment, right? You kind of develop this fear of abandonment. A couple live chats ago where I talked about a sibling and parent jealousy, I think I highlighted that borderline personality disorder can develop over time in a situation where a child feels unloved, uncared for, and very toxic family dynamics are kind of shaping personality. So a toxic step parent can actually contribute to shaping a personality disorder within you. So borderline personality disorder is one of them, right? You can also develop dark empath traits over time as well. You could be loving and caring and affectionate, but because of that step parent's impact on your life and family, if you're not well adjusted, you can develop dark empath behaviors and traits over time. Okay, guys, I think that's it for what can happen to you. So let me get at the chat box. Let me see what you guys are saying. We're going to wrap up. Elizabeth Pepper says, my child stepmother is antisocial personality disorder, just like his father. I swear. It's like the only reason they married was for the rights that come with the title. Yeah, sometimes that's it. Sometimes that's it. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes uh in situation where there's a biological father, sometimes he thinks he's getting out of a bad relationship with your biological parent, but he's going into another relationship that's worse. That's worse, you know? And so he's trying to, in a sense, and this is what happens in these kind of dynamics, he's trying to get rid of the ex, right? Have a relationship with you and then bring you into the new relationship. But if the new relationship is unhealthy, that puts you at risk. And so now you're dealing with a situation where you don't want to hurt your dad, but your dad's with somebody who's a sociopath. So what do you do, right? And in some of these dynamics, the step parent who is a sociopath will over time try to show your dad things. This is an example. Show your dad things about you that could cause your dad to slam the door in your face and say, I want nothing to do with you and my ex, so then you lose your dad. So it can get really ugly. Queen Common Sense says their mother would try to bait me into addressing her children by coaching them to act out when visiting with their dad. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. Sometimes that ex-spouse does coach and cause chaos in the new relationship. Sometimes that does happen. But how does it impact the biological child? Well, the biological child gets stuck in the middle. They don't know which way to go because they're not getting along with the step parent. And now their biological parent is fighting with the step parent. And so that can cause chaos too. I have maybe 4 families in my practice right now who are going through that, and it's horrific. Nancy R says it was and is easier to be the step parent than having one for sure. Yeah, I've heard that before. Yeah, I've heard that before. Thank you, Silent Walk. I appreciate that. Thank you. Cherry's Jubilee says, my stepfather saved my life and stayed just to rescue me till my mother broke his mind, fed him drugs, and encouraged him to do evil. He was soulless when I was 14 and started peeping when I was 15. Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Sometimes step parents are like that. They're wonderful, right? Because they're coming from the outside and they're stepping into a very chaotic situation, but it's wonderful because they are healthy and they can rescue you sometimes, you know? Other times not so much. Queen Pen 888 says, "I always felt abandoned by my mother. She chooses him over me. Mhm, and treats me and my sister differently. I'm done with them all." Sometimes that is the case. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can feel abandoned by the biological parent, and then you can also feel abandoned by the step parent, and it just causes chaos needlessly. Cheryl says, "My daughter just told me that when appropriate, a step parent can step in, but when it's not appropriate, they need to step back." I really think that is such a smart way of thinking. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, I think a step parent can step in sometimes when it's appropriate. Let's say, for example, for a young child, if they're getting suspended in school and the step parent has to pick up the child from school because of being suspended, I think a step parent can have a conversation with the child on the way back home and ask what's going on. That's a beautiful way to step in. I also think, though, that a step parent should make sure that there's a very firm relationship with the child first, before they do anything. Even an adult child, right? If something goes wrong, I think a step parent can step in with the adult child, but there needs to be an established relationship there first. Otherwise, it sounds like you're just trying to take control, you know? Yali Olivia, hello and welcome to the live chat. Glad to have you. We're going to wrap up here in literally 2 seconds. Amy says, "Hello and welcome to the live chat." By the way, says, "Both parents chose their partners over me and my brothers. This was a chaotic experience growing up. I felt barely tolerated, recovering, reparenting myself now after decades of not being welcome at home." Yeah, absolutely. My Lord. Yeah. Let me just say too, and this dynamic is in my practice now, that sometimes the biological parents remarry other people, and it is like they are taking on different families, and it leaves you in the middle alone, right? That's an unhealthy dynamic. Very unhealthy dynamic. Okay, I'm just looking for people that I haven't been able to respond to yet before we go. Yali Olivia says, "Do you believe parents should communicate to their child of a potential new partner, step parent, as well as a child being born? Kindly advise. Do you believe a parent should communicate to their child of a potential new partner, step parent, as well as new children being born?" I don't know the personal dynamics there, but I think it's always classy and gracious to say, "I'm getting really close to this person. I think that this is going to be something that may help us both. I think that you're going to like this person. I truly believe that we can make a future for ourselves with this person. They may be coming into our life, and there may be other children. How do you feel about that?" Sometimes if you pose it as a question, I think that's okay. Even for an adult child, right? You can have dinner with the adult child and say, "There's somebody that I'm interested in, and they're interested in me," and then go from there. Yeah, I think it's classy and respectful to do that. A lot of research in psychology around step parents say, and backs the idea that if you don't introduce a partner, it can really be a total shock to the biological child or the stepchild. It can be a shock emotionally and psychologically, and that can cause chaos for many years. So it's just gracious to create a new relationship by introducing that person. Cam says, "Is there a good way to approach a step parent who oversteps boundaries?" Yes. I think before I continue your comment, I think it's okay to say, "I respect that you are my mom's new wife, father, my dad's new wife. I respect that you are my parents' new spouse, but this is not about you. This is about my biological parent and I." I think that's okay to say. And I think it's okay to not address that step parent. and just embrace the biological parent for the time being. We're psychology and psychology around step parents, and some of the research that I will post in the description box does highlight that it's important to draw that line. And a very healthy step parent can step back and say, yes, absolutely, I respect that, right? Whenever I get step parent dynamics in my practice, that's what I say. It's okay to say you're overstepping your boundaries, but you can do it in a very nice way. Kim goes on to say she seems to get offended when boundaries are established. Of course, right? Because when you set a boundary with a step parent, you're saying, you're not my biological parent. So I'm putting this in place as a boundary, and this is where you belong. And remember earlier, I said there's kind of this idea of playing house. Sometimes step parents get involved and they want to play house. And that means ignoring the fact that they're a step parent, right? They're ignoring that fact, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so that desire to be a part of a family unit means that that step parent may overstep. And so when you push them back, you're bringing it to their awareness that they're overstepping. And that's not something they want to be reminded of, right? Because in some step families, you really have to look at this. There is no blood, right? And so sometimes that can create chaos, because the desire is to sometimes be a family of blood. But if you're in a blended family or a step family situation, there needs to be a boundary set. You are not my flesh and blood. And I have a biological parent already, and I would like to keep the relationship between the two of us for the time being or for this reason. So, yeah, that's complicated. Kim goes on to say that may be why we are still estranged. I'm sure, setting that boundary. Yeah. Jeremy Robinson, hello and welcome to the live chat that we're getting ready to wrap up on. I'm glad to see you. Says, my stepfather tried to tell me and my sibling what to do. The problem is that we did not have a relationship with him, and he had a drug problem and an alcoholic and was abuser. Yeah, that's horrible. I'm sorry that happened to you. That's a dynamic. That's technically the dynamic that I'm talking about in tonight's live chat, which is that here's a step parent. They've jumped in. They're trying to be the biological parent. They're creating chaos and hurt and pain, and maybe even complex PTSD on my part. I don't think a step parent who doesn't have a relationship with you should be correcting you, giving their 2 cents, or trying to support you in any way. There should be an established relationship first. I don't know how many times I can try to sell that idea, but I feel like I'm constantly selling that idea in my practice. There has to be a pre-established relationship. Without that relationship, everything becomes kind of traumatic for kids, children, or adult children. Elizabeth Pepper says step parents and biological parents should all have healthy relationships easily if they have the best interest of the child. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Unfortunately, with personality disordered parents, that isn't possible. Very much agree. Agree. Well said. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. And I'm sure you are too. Thank you for that. Okay, there's so many. Thank you so much, Silent Walk. I appreciate your encouragement there, and I'm glad it's helpful. Before we go, Cam says, would one word answers be considered stonewalling as well? Absolutely. Because really what you're doing is straddling the fence. I'll give you a little bit, but that's all you're going to get. I'll give you a little bit. Yep. Yes. No. Maybe. I guess so. Whatever you say. Those are all state or comments, I should call them, that says, I'm stonewalling you. I'm not talking to you. I'll give you a little bit, but that's as much as I'll give you. It's still stonewalling. Okay, there's a lot of comments still left. Ugh, I want to read them, but we have to go. Sunkiss Dark and Dainty01, glad to have you back. Welcome to this live chat. Tammy Nicely says, my step granddad tried to sexually abuse me. My mom knew, but never said anything, always felt minimized. Yeah, absolutely, I'm sure. That's a complicated dynamic. And let me say, research on child sexual, physical, emotional, psychological abuse does show that sometimes step family situations kind of creates the dynamics needed for abuse to happen. For abuse to happen. That's complicated. That's going to take me a whole other live chat to talk about. Annie Walker, hello, and good evening to you as well. Glad to have you in tonight's live chat. We are going to sign off. Hi, V. Just always glad to see you as well, and all your awesome emojis. Glad to have you. Rosa or Rasa, I hope I said that correctly. Welcome to the live chat. Glad to have you. Tarika Styles, hello. I haven't seen you in a while. Welcome to tonight's live chat. We're actually going to sign off. Annabis, the opener of ways, welcome. Glad to have you in tonight's live chat. I welcome you guys to come back tomorrow. Rasa, I hope I'm saying that right, just asked when is the next live. It is tomorrow night. I'm going to be at home in my home office. We'll talk about something else that is just as controversial, but I think it's going to mean more to all of you, right? Because this is such a narrow topic. But stay tuned for tomorrow's live chat. I'm going to post something in the comments section tonight so you'll know what tomorrow's topic is going to be. All right, guys, thank you so much for being a part of tonight's live chat. I hope you have a good night. I hope to see you tomorrow. Have a good night, guys. Bye-bye.